The president, in his, what we believe was ad-libbing, we did not have prepared remarks from the president, which is unusual. White Houses usually distribute prepared remarks, so we don't know what was digression from those remarks and what was ad-lib. But the president did repeatedly seem to be ad-libbing when he was remarking on the expected impact of the economic decisions he's already made 6 weeks in, saying that the American people would have to bear with him, that there would be a little disturbance, that there would be an adjustment period. And again, he said a little disturbance, essentially suggesting that the roiling that we saw in the markets is something that he knows he caused, but he hopes people will not mind. For the record, the worst inflation in this country was in 1980. For the record, the economy that he was left by President Biden was not a catastrophe. It was literally the best economy in the world. It was described by The Economist magazine as the envy of the world. That was the economy that was left to Donald Trump by Joe Biden. For the record, Social Security is not paying benefits in large numbers to 300-year-old people or 250-year-old people or 200-year-old people or 150-year-old people. In fact, the idea of Social Security as a bastion of massive fraud and overpayment is completely false. For the record, U.S. auto company CEOs are not psyched and delighted and so excited about President Trump's economic policies, including his tariffs. Take, for example, the CEO of Ford, Jim Farley, who said that Trump's tariff policies would, quote, blow a hole in the U.S. auto industry that, quote, we've never seen. The president flat out lied about U.S. versus European spending to support what used to be our allies in Ukraine. The U.S. has committed about $125 billion to Ukraine's defense. Europe has committed about $259 billion. The president radically misstating the character and quantity of our relative support for what used to be our ally, now appears to be only Europe's ally and no longer ours. For the record, Joe Biden did not close over 100 power plants. There were more utility-sized power plants up and running in the United States when Joe Biden left office than when he achieved office. For the record, there is no EV mandate. For the record, oil and gas production in the United States hit all-time records under President Joe Biden. For the record, even DOGE has never claimed that they have saved hundreds of billions of dollars in savings. The largest items they have claimed to achieve as savings in the U.S. budget have been debunked and they've been taken down, but even they don't falsely claim hundreds of billions of dollars worth of saving. For the record, and this is disgusting, the president made a spectacle out of praising a young man who thus far survived pediatric cancer, as if the president had something to do with that. This was in the midst of him praising DOGE. The DOGE cuts, among other things, have cut off funding for ongoing research into pediatric cancer. For the record, I will note that Donald Trump did admit in his remarks today explicitly that Elon Musk is the head of DOGE. And while that comes as no surprise to anybody who's been following the facts of this matter, that will end up in court because that is directly contrary to what the administration has overtly sworn to a federal judge about the leadership of DOGE. I should also note, and this doesn't have to be for the record, I'll just note it for our own experience tonight, that at that point in the speech, when the president talked about how we will no longer be ruled by unelected bureaucrats, Democrats in the chamber pointed and laughed at Elon Musk. Unelected bureaucrat. Nicole Wallace, I'm sorry to dump a lot of fact checks there, and that's not even scratching the surface of the things that need to be fact checked there. That's literally what was off the top of my head. Yeah. So there's more to say along those lines.
People should know that. I mean, this.
What do you think is important tonight?
Look, we know what Donald Trump is not going to say tonight. It's a good place to start. He's not going to talk about his plan to lower the cost of groceries. He's not going to talk about his plan to make it easier for first-time home buyers to actually be able to buy a home. He's not going to talk about his plan to be able to cut the cost of health care. And he's not going to talk about how he is protecting families from getting cheated or scammed on credit cards and mortgages and Venmo apps. He's not going to talk about any of that because that is not what Donald Trump is doing. Instead, here's a guy who you may remember ran for president saying, oh, I would lower costs on day one for American families. On day one, those were his words. We're now 6 weeks in, and all he's doing is raising costs, raising them directly on, take a look at the cost of eggs, of groceries, what's going to happen to maple syrup, but also raising them indirectly by making families more vulnerable, by taking the financial cop off the beat, the CFPB, so that people all across this country can get scammed to the tune of literally billions of dollars.
Yeah, when you look at your role in that, on the one hand, many people are concerned about this sort of Trump-Musk set of cuts. On the other hand, something that you, along with Democrats in your party, President Obama, something you built clearly scares them, threatens them, and their allies and donors. Can you speak on that tonight, and what is the road ahead in that clash?
So remember that we had a bunch of consumer financial protection laws, but they were scattered among 7 different agencies. None of the agencies made them a first priority. And what happened? Somebody figured out you could break the law and sell a bunch of scammy mortgages, and frankly, nobody had come after you. And then that built up and built up and built up and made it into our entire banking system, caused a crash in 2008 that cost 10 million families their homes, and taxpayers had to shell out $700 billion to bail out giant financial institutions. We came out of that and said, never again. We built the Consumer Financial Protection Agency to be a cop on the beat, just to be there on all this financial stuff to enforce all of the laws that exist. The problem is that, here's the good news and bad news all in one. That consumer agency discovered over the last dozen years $21 billion in fraud against American families. And it made those companies return that money that had been fraudulently obtained directly to the families they cheated. Really good for American consumers, but not so good for the fraudsters, not so good for the billionaires who like making money off those scams. So they've been on the attack for this agency ever since before it was born. And now Elon Musk, who wants to launch his own financial product, X Money, is saying, I tell you what, how about we just get the financial cop out of the picture before he launches his financial product, and that way he won't have to worry about, things like following the law. That's what this fight is really about.
Senator Warren, it's Jen Psaki. I've been so excited to ask you about tariffs because you speak in English about a lot of these issues that everybody's trying to understand out there. So we hear a lot they're going to raise the cost of goods on people. We hear about industries. We hear about farmers. We hear about electricity. For people watching right now who are wondering, how's this going to impact me? How will it impact them? And when will they start to see the impact, do you expect?
So let me just start with it, if I can, Jen, just back up a tiny little bit. Tariffs can be a really valuable tool, as one of the tools in our toolbox. So, for example, we need to be making more pharmaceuticals or drugs here at home instead of counting on foreign countries to do that or counting on China to supply all of the ingredients. We might put a tariff in place in part to protect a growing industry. We might want to get a supply chain back here in the United States, and we might use a tariff to protect it. But understand, just simply saying everything that comes in from Canada is going to get hit with a 25% tariff, you're going to feel it in a whole lot of different ways. You're going to feel it, I said earlier, you're going to feel it in your maple syrup, but you're going to feel it in things like lumber, which in turn affects housing and how many housing starts there are, how many new houses get built, and then what the price of those houses are. So this is one of those things. Target stood up today and said, hey, look, you put that 25% tariff on Mexico, and we're going to have a problem with the produce. We turn over our produce every 3 days, and a lot of that comes from Mexico. Prices are going to go up immediately. Some places you'll see it immediately, but if it stays in place across the board, it's going to hit in 1,000 ways that what you see overall is just prices have gone up. Remember, from a president who ran on he would bring prices down, who after he won said the reason he won was his promise to bring prices down. And now, talk about the world's ultimate bait and switch. He's off trying to increase prices for families rather than decrease them.
Let me ask you about some of the politics of what we're seeing going on right now and the backdrop of it, because there's a lot of activism out there. A lot of people are angry at Republican town halls across the country. There were reports today that the chairman of the NRCC that oversees the House races has told Republican candidates and members not to hold town halls. What do you make of that?
You know, what does that mean in a democracy? When one of the two major political parties in America says, in effect, the only way we're going to survive right now is if you don't go talk to the people you represent, if you don't hear from the people you represent. Why, if you were a member of Congress, would you say that and would you do that? And I actually think I know the answer. Remember, the House of Representatives and the Senate right now, under Republican leadership, are trying to move forward with something that is even more unpopular than the cuts you've already seen. And that is tax giveaways to billionaires paid for on the backs of hardworking American families. That was wildly unpopular last time around, and by golly, it's going to be wildly unpopular this time around. So instead of running the risk that some of those Republicans may actually hear what their constituents have to say about that, I think Republican leadership is saying, just put yourself in a bubble, stay away from that, because it is absolutely critical to the Republican leadership in Congress, to Donald Trump, and to Elon Musk to deliver those giant tax breaks for billionaires and make families pay for them. That's the central view, thrust of what's going on right now. Billionaires win, families lose.
An act of war. That is how billionaire investor Warren Buffett describes Donald Trump's tariffs. And the economic fallout for all Americans bears out Buffett's choice of words. Like touching a hot stove, the Trump administration has now fired off the first salvo in what is right now looking like a trade war that will raise the cost for just about everything Americans spend money on. It comes 12 weeks after an election in which the price of stuff like eggs, groceries, and housing was top of mind for voters. Donald Trump today imposing tariffs against our three biggest trading partners, a whopping 25% on all items coming in from Canada and from Mexico, and an additional 10% on top of what is currently imposed on China. For some context, 43% of all the stuff we buy from abroad comes from those three countries. Unsurprisingly, our largest trading partners are responding to Trump's, quote, act of war. China is imposing a tax of up to 15% on goods exported by U.S. farmers. Washington Post reports this, quote, the move targets some of the United States' most important exports to China, including soybeans, meat, and grains. Canada, which, by the way, is our top supplier of grain and meat and our second largest supplier of auto parts after Mexico, is imposing tariffs on $107 billion worth of goods from the U.S. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calls Donald Trump's move to punish Canada a, quote, very dumb thing to do. The CEO of retail giant Target is saying today that the impact for American consumers could be immediate. Watch.
We know for certain categories, like fruits and vegetables, where during this winter season, we depend on Mexico for a significant amount of supply. You know, those are categories where we'll try to protect pricing, but the consumer will likely see price increases over the next couple of days.
over the next couple of days. So those go
are
in
really
instantaneously.
short supply chains. You think about all the fresh produce.
Yeah.
You know, we depend on Mexico during the winter. We're going to try to make sure we can do everything we can to protect pricing. But if there's a 25% tariff, those prices will go up.
For things like what? Strawberries, avocados, bananas. What are we talking
You've
about?
got that list right.
Is that so? Those
are some of the key items.
And those prices could change within days in the stores.
Could change certainly over the next week.
Within the next week. And there's more. Trump has promised tariffs on aluminum and steel, agricultural products, and foreign cars in the next few weeks, just adding to the turmoil and uncertainty in the global economy. There's a lot at stake here for just about everyone. The tariffs impact the pocketbook issues that keep people up at night. They have the power to sway elections. But there's also our standing in the world. New York Times reports this, quote, if Canada and Mexico decide that America is no longer a reliable partner, one that keeps its word and prizes stability over chaos, they may seek other customers for their goods. They could even turn to U.S. adversaries like China. America would end up more isolated on the world stage. The issue isn't just about trade. It's about America's alliances in general. No larger sign of our isolation right now than this. Officials from our normally friendly neighbor to the north talking tough to and about us. Here's the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford.
If they want to try to annihilate Ontario, I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face. And I'm encouraging every other province to do the same. Quebec, Manitoba, BC, we all have to act in unison out east. They rely on our energy. They need to feel the pain. They want to come at us hard. We're going to come back twice as hard.
Donald Trump launching a trade war that will cost consumers and hurt American businesses and potentially leave America isolated on the world stage is where we start today with the aforementioned Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford. Premier Ford, thank you for being here. I saw those remarks. I read the coverage of it. Just tell us again how, first of all, back up and tell us how Trump's moves impact your constituents and impact us here at home.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, Nicole. And I have to tell you, Canada loves the U.S. They love the American people. There's one person that's created this chaos, and that's President Trump. You know, President Trump had a mandate to come in and cut costs and create more jobs. That's a total opposite. Manufacturing plants will close, assembly lines will shut down in the auto sector within the next week, unemployment will go up, and inflation will go up, cost of gas will go up, and this is the last thing we want to do. We are your number one customer in the world, Canada. We buy more products than anyone. We buy 400% more vehicles than Mexico, 200% more than any jurisdiction in the world. And by the way, you know, you take the energy, the 4.3 million barrels that we ship down every single day to keep your economy going, take that off the balance sheet. The U.S. has a $56 billion trade surplus with Canada, and I have no problem with that. Ontario alone is the engine of Canada. We're the largest economic driver. If we were a standalone country, we'd be the third largest trading partner in the world to the U.S. Ontario alone. We're the number one trading partner to 17 states, number two to 11 other ones. And across Canada, we're the number one trading partner to 28 states. I want to ship the U.S. more electricity. I want to ship them more high-grade nickel. That 50% of your economy and your military relies on nickel, high-grade nickel coming from Ontario. We have more critical minerals than anywhere in the world. I don't want to go to China. I don't want to ship it out. But he keeps putting, these threats and trying to attack our families and our businesses. We'll have no choice. And I'm the first to say, let's tariff China. They're the problem, not your closest friend and ally. We up here in Canada, we find it ironic. We love the Americans, and here he is cozying up to Putin. You got to be kidding me. When we stood shoulder to shoulder with each other for a couple centuries right now, through tough times, and we were there for the Americans, and you've been there for us. So this is, as far as I'm concerned, Nicole, it's the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. but we're going to get hurt, but the Americans are going to get hurt tremendously.
Let's go through some of the items and just help me understand and us understand the interconnectedness that makes this possible. You said this. Today I'm writing to every senator, congressman and woman, and the governors from New York State, Michigan, and Minnesota, telling them that if these tariffs persist, if the Trump administration follows through on any more tariffs, we will immediately apply a 25% surcharge on the electricity we export. We will not hesitate to shut off their power as well. Could the lights go out in some of those states where you supply electricity?
Well, that's the last thing I want to do, but I'm going to implement immediately 25% surcharge. We keep 1.5 million homes and businesses lit up in New York State, in Michigan, in Minnesota. I've talked to all three governors. And I have to apologize to the American people that we're going through this. This is totally unnecessary. We're your strongest ally. But to answer your question, yes, when our plants start shutting down and we have large unemployment lines and people are trying to pay their mortgages and put food on their table, I will use every single tool in our toolkit to fight back. And that's the last thing I want to do. Nicole, I love the Americans. I spent 20 years of my life in Chicago and New Jersey, and all Canadians love Americans. It's one person that's causing this problem. And it's unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. Let's continue building the two strongest nations in the world. I call it the AMCAN fortress. We have the critical minerals. We have the energy. We have the steel and the aluminum that you need. We have the lumber to build their homes. And he's going after it all. So what else can we do? We're going to start shipping it to countries around the world. And that's what we're going to do. We have more critical minerals than anywhere in the world right here in Ontario. So, let's work this out. Let's move forward. And let's be two great partners as we have been for a couple hundred years.
You ripped up Ontario's contract with Starlink. Explain that.
Well, we tore it up. I can't have anyone who's connected so deeply with President Trump trying to destroy our province and try to destroy our country. It's unacceptable. We're the largest purchaser of alcohol in the entire world. Ontario is. We have a liquor control board, so it all goes through the province. We ship up 3,600 products from the U.S. from 35 states. We have now cleared off all alcohol across all the shelves. And I just encouraged all our premiers, which they just agreed to, they're pulling all their alcohol off. So states like Kentucky, they're bourbon. They're going to be laying people off. They may be shutting parts of their plants down, which again, as far as I'm concerned, is unacceptable. We shouldn't have to be doing this whatsoever. I'm going to stockpile the high-grade nickel and sell it to the rest of the world. That China has the market cornered on it. 50% of your products that you manufacture nickel with in the military come from Ontario. That's stopped. I'm cutting off everything we possibly can. I don't want to do it. I'd rather do the opposite, ship you more high-grade nickel and more lithium and more cobalt and every other critical mineral that we have up here. But unfortunately, there's one person that should be held accountable, and that's President Trump.
Let's check back in with our own Jacob Soboroff, who has been speaking with 4 fired federal workers in Washington, D.C. Jacob, I'm guessing tonight those workers had a different experiencing watching the president than they have in previous speeches.
Yeah, they sure did, Steph. And I have to say, it was really an extraordinary experience to spend time with these 4 really remarkable individuals. For people that weren't watching earlier in the broadcast, I want to reintroduce them to you all very briefly. Starting here in the lower right-hand part of your screen, it's Nigella Nakuna, who was fired from the U.S. Digital Service, which was the precursor to DOGE. To her left is Alex Taylor, who was fired from the U.S. Geological Survey. Behind Alex is Jesus Murillo, fired from HUD, and Catherine Steele was fired from the U.S. Forest Service. I want to ask a broad question first. It might sound cheeky, but I really do mean it sincerely. Does anybody feel like they understand better why they were fired after watching the speech tonight? Nobody. Yeah. Okay, Jesus, let me start with you here. I said before you were a presidential management fellow. This is a very elite program within the federal government to bring in the best and the brightest. The entire program has been terminated after 48 years under Democratic and Republican presidents. When President Trump said about the federal bureaucracy, my administration will reclaim power from this unaccountable bureaucracy, it bugged you in a particular way. How come?
Well, I think for myself, being a presidential management fellow, this is a 100%, merit-based program. People coming in are taking jobs that have lesser pay. They want to serve the American public. And for you to, blanket statements saying the entire bureaucracy is untamed and, doesn't have any tethering to anything. I mean, look at us. We're everyday average Americans that just want to serve the American public. And we're not allowed to do that.
And you said a large portion of your time was actually responding to congressional inquiries about whether or not the money was being spent appropriately in the case of the Housing and Urban Development Department.
Absolutely. We were responding to over 4,000 inquiries. And keep in mind, these are people, we're working with congressional staffers saying, hey, how can we support you? Hey, how can we offer assistance to make sure your grantees, the people on the ground, are getting the funding that they need?
And just to reiterate, so what you're saying is the Trump administration canceled the Presidential Management Fellows program. He talked about DEI, but this was a merit-based program.
When we're in the application process, we're not allowed to give any identifying information. It is 100% merit-based.
All right, Catherine, let's talk about the U.S. Forest Service. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the only time we heard anything about public lands was when President Trump renamed a national wildlife refuge in Texas to honor the victim of a killing by an undocumented immigrant. We didn't hear anything about federal lands otherwise, did we?
No, despite the fact that over 350 protests and rallies took place at national parks and national forest offices this past Saturday, and thousands of people attended to speak out for our public lands and for the people who serve them. I'm shocked that nothing came of that. And in addition, an executive order was signed that same day on Saturday that opened up our public lands to unsustainable timber harvesting.
I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that it didn't seem like wildlands, the land management agencies, were even on the radar of the president in this speech at all.
No, I would absolutely agree with that.
Nigella, let's talk about you were at the U.S. Digital Service, the precursor to DOGE, but one of your main focuses was on making the immigration system, including the enforcement system, more efficient. And the president touted all these accomplishments that he said were accomplishments about immigration, about deportations, closing the border. The part that I watched you react to most strongly was when he said, the media and our friends in the Democrat Party keep saying we need new legislation. We must have legislation to secure the border, but it turned out that all we really needed was a new president.
Yeah.
What bugged you so much about that?
I think the demonization of immigrants in this speech today was as disappointing as it was frightening. And the thing that bothered me is it's a multifaceted approach that we need to attack the immigration problem, and it's been an issue over multiple presidents.
Which you yourself have been working on in terms of efficiency.
Definitely. Part of it are legislative fixes, but the other part are really process and tech improvements. And by getting rid of the subject matter experts that do this work for decades and the people who have the tech capabilities, and then more importantly, the trust that you build between agencies to actually align and prioritize this work is really difficult to see. You can gut something in 5 minutes, but to get the apparatus back up and running, that might take 5 years. So it was really disappointing to see some of those comments.
For a very brief moment, and Rachel referenced this earlier, you worked for DOGE because the U.S. Digital Service became DOGE. And when the president said that he has saved, I want to make sure I get this right, hundreds of billions of dollars, your reaction was you shook your head.
Yeah, I think as we've seen before, a lot of those savings that they have touted have been slowly removed as people see some of that discrepancy in the numbers. And I think it's really important for people to go back, keep checking the website, and hold DOGE accountable for the things that they are and aren't doing.
All right, and let's go to Alex Taylor, who's our geologist again in the group. We heard President Trump talk about something you worked directly on, which was critical earth minerals. He said that he was, quote, expanding critical minerals and rare earths. But he fired you. That's what you were working on.
Yeah, I supported active research projects on identifying sources of critical minerals in the U.S. domestically. It bothers me that he's more interested in engaging in neocolonialism to get minerals from other countries rather than supporting the scientists and the researchers who are aiding the minerals industry here in America.
You're talking about Greenland.
And Ukraine.
You also were particularly seemed annoyed by the statement that he made about thousands of federal workers not showing up to the office because the work that you do and your colleagues do with the U.S. Geological Survey is not done in the office. It's largely done in the field.
For many people, yes. The USGS is the most prestigious earth science research institution in the world. And we've been at the office this whole time. We do work in laboratories at the office, but lots of people are in the field every day. We monitor the nation's waterways. We monitor earthquakes, volcanoes, and other hazards. We study ecosystems. So our office is our nation's lands.
It really is a profound honor to have spent this time with you guys. And again, I just want to say, for me personally, on behalf of, I'm sure so many people that are watching, really sorry about the situation that you guys are in, and really wishing you guys all the best. Thank you guys very much. Steph, back over to you.
Jacob, thank you so much. What an impressive group of people. And just juxtapose that with the way both the president and Elon Musk talk in such derogatory terms about just the general federal government workforce.
Also, just like, what an impressive group of people, right? I mean, from all the different places I've ever worked in my life, like having a group of 4 colleagues that was that impressive and credentialed and articulate.
By the way,
it would be almost like working here.
Can we just point out all 4 of those people with their expertise could make more money in the private sector and have chosen not to.
Yeah. Well, they've just been insulted and told that they're low productivity. Right? It's insane.
I mean, I live in the D.C. area. Everybody thinks that every federal worker is in the D.C. area. 80% of federal workers are outside of the D.C. area. And this is, I think, something people in the country are learning, that these are your postal workers. These are the people who are working at FBI offices who are keeping your community safe. They're the FAA workers who are making sure you can fly safely on the airlines. There are people who are working at the VA. It is not a bunch of, I love government bureaucrats, but it's not a bunch of government bureaucrats. It is a bunch of people working in communities. And I think people are hopefully learning that, but that's an important part of this to understand.
Joining us now is one of the Democrats who actually walked out of the speech tonight, Florida Democratic Congressman Maxwell Frost. We saw him leave the House chamber. He took off his jacket. You could see the T-shirt he was wearing over his dress shirt. It says, "No kings live here." Congressman Frost, really appreciate you making time to be with us tonight. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Tell us about the decision to wear that shirt and to walk out at the moment you did.
I think it's important for people to see that their leaders understand that this is not a normal moment. We're in the middle of a billionaire administrative takeover and coup of our country, where they want to cut Medicaid, cut Social Security, cut Medicare, cut all the things that we fought for and earned in order to give tax breaks to billionaires and corporations. It's not a news story for this country, but it is the most overt I think it's ever been. And so in the spirit of being a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, but also coming from organizing, decided to do a walkout with a group of members wearing a message that not only, the press could see, but that the president could see. He calls himself a king, but we're a country of no kings, especially when these kings want to do nothing for the people and take all the money and give it to themselves. That's exactly what Donald Trump wants to do.
Let me ask about that, the specificity of the message there. I mean, one of the issues that I think the country is sort of having a hard time calibrating, like getting a sense of like how big is this? How different is this from previous political confrontations we've had between people with different ideas about the way the government should run or what we should be doing with our money? I think one of the things that people just can't grasp is the king idea, right? The king idea is not just the unitary presidency, right? It's not just about consolidating power over the executive branch. The idea of a king, which is what you had on your back of your shirt, is that you've got a unitary power, that the Congress is decorative or beside the point or could be abolished and nothing would happen, that the courts are decorative. The courts are there to essentially ratify what the ruler wants to do, and that the rule of law is really just the rule of the ruler, and the law can be dressed up to occasion whatever it is he wants. Is that the scale of threat to this country that you think we are literally up against, or is this a hyperbolic charge?
It's not hyperbolic at all. And this shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. It is all in Project 2025. Donald Trump is the president, but he is also the Speaker of the House, effectively. He has an entire Republican Congress that is allowing him to do whatever he wants. None of them utter a peep against what he's saying unless their town halls are stormed and either they're running out or they say, maybe I disapprove a little bit. But Donald Trump has complete control over the Republicans in Congress. And so what the founders set out to do is have a Congress and have a presidency that were co-equal branches of government, checks on one another, checks and balances. But we don't have that right now. We have one person who runs the Congress because he runs the entire majority.
One of the things that we saw in the Democratic response from Senator Slotkin was an interesting choice. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything like this before. And you talk about your organizing background. She sort of raised the alarm a little bit along the lines that you were talking about tonight, and then said, as a CIA officer, which is her past, that she's seen democracies flicker out in other parts of the world. And then she gave Americans a list of things they can do to try to hold on to our democracy, talking about contacting their member of Congress, joining groups that are working to try to hold on to our democracy. She said pointedly, if there isn't a group that you feel like is in your area or among people who you know is doing the work that you think ought to be done, you need to found that group. You need to start that yourself. Very pointed, organizing message from a member of Congress who's not thought of as a real radical. I wonder if that, if I get your reaction to that, and if you had anything to add in terms of what you think people within the sound of your voice ought to be doing right now, given the dire prospects that you see for the country.
I had a town hall about a week and a half ago when we put out the link. Within 4 hours of one email, we had over 600 RSVPs. And at this standing room only town hall, the message was clear from everybody. Two things. They wanted to learn about how serious and dire the situation is. And two, they wanted to be put to work. And as someone who comes from an organizing background, March for Our Lives and other organizations, it is a gold mine when the people contact you and say, what can I do? You know, I come from going to people and knocking on their doors and begging them to volunteer, begging them to get involved. And now the people are saying, put us to work. We want to fight for our democracy, for our country, for Medicare, for Medicaid, for programs that help and that working people have earned. And so I think it is important to make sure people know that the United States, our democracy can break. We can lose it if we don't defend it. And fascism and authoritarians, they gain power when there is no opposition. That's part of the reason I've told people you have to make the decision. Are we the minority or are we the opposition? Because I do believe an authoritarian can take hold when it's just the minority. But when there's a strong opposition, we can fight it back and we can come back stronger than ever. And so I agree with giving people something to do. But first off, you got to explain to people how serious the situation is.
Congressman Maxwell Frost, one of a number of Democrats who did not make it through the speech tonight, left in the middle of the president's remarks. Congressman, I really appreciate you joining us tonight and being with us. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me on.
All right. I should mention, I gave you a list a little bit earlier on about the Democrats who we know did walk out during the speech. Other than the initial confrontation that happened basically right as President Trump started speaking, and that was Congressman Al Green, and they sort of performatively summoned the Sergeant-at-Arms to escort him out. A very dramatic moment there. A number of other Democrats walked out during the speech. They include Maxwell Frost, who we just spoke with, also Ayanna Pressley, Jasmine Crockett, Maxine Dexter from Maryland, Andrea Salinas from Oregon, Ilhan Omar, Pramila Jayapal, Melanie Stansbury from New Mexico, Jamie Raskin from Maryland, who we spoke with earlier this evening, Zoe Lofgren from California, who's a member of the January 6th investigation. Also, at least two Democratic U.S. senators left the room, Senator Chris Van Hollen and Senator Bernie Sanders.
Joining us now is Claire McCaskill, former U.S. Senator from Missouri, and Elise Jordan, former aide to the George W. Bush White House and State Department. Both are MSNBC political analysts. Who want to go first?
Welcome very much. Well, that was rich. This whole evening was just filled with a lot of stuff. Elise, I want to start with you on an aspect of this, which I thought was, how should we put it, rich. It was a rich moment for me when Trump talked about an unelected bureaucracy. Let's take a quick listen to that, please.
We have hundreds of thousands of federal workers who have not been showing up to work. my administration will reclaim power from this unaccountable bureaucracy, and we will restore true democracy to America again. And any federal bureaucrat who resists this change will be removed from office immediately. Because we are draining the swamp. It's very simple. And the days of rule by unelected bureaucrats are over.
So there were two aspects of that I thought were rich. One, the bobbleheads behind the president voted for those bureaucrats in that bureaucracy, that they're now sitting there watching be deconstructed with broad smiles on their face. Second, the most obvious unelected bureaucrat at the center of all of this is Elon Musk. And I think, for me at least, as I hope for a lot of Americans, they're beginning to see now just how dangerous this proposition could be. What was your take in contextualizing that moment against the backdrop of this evening?
It is interesting to me how Elon Musk has done a pretty good job of making Donald Trump still feel relatively unthreatened. Why would you give Elon Musk a prime seat at your State of the Union to highlight that he has a front and centered role as an unelected bureaucrat? Yet that's what Donald Trump did. And all night, that was basically the tone of Donald Trump saying that he's going to cut he's going to cut taxes on your wages, that he's going to cut taxes on Social Security. All these moves that Republicans are hoping that he's not going to do, he still is embracing. He just doesn't get yet that he is in a more politically perilous position when it comes to the economy than he is portraying and giving out to the world. He's stuck in the culture war, but America wants to know what's happening to the stock market, what's happening with the price of eggs.
Yeah. And he is not alone in being in that perilous position. He is taking Republicans in Congress with him for the ride. There was something about him standing in front of the legislative body and talking very little about legislation or how they are going to be partners in this agenda. Most of this he wants to do by executive fiat.
Alicia, don't you know he's king? He doesn't need them. The heck with that other branch. He's got Elon. You know, the biggest laugh line was that he was going to balance the budget. That was the biggest laugh line in the whole speech. I mean, I spit my Diet Coke when he said that. If anybody believes this guy is capable of balancing a budget, well, then you need to go live in Greenland, which will not be part of the United States. And I got to tell you, the contrast between him and the senator from Michigan, I mean, she nailed it. That's a really hard thing to do. And I just want to give her props because she did exactly what needed to be done. She kept it real, relatable. She talked about things that people care about. She explained things in a way that made perfect sense. And you know what else she did? She actually did it and was likable. And I got to tell you, talking to senators today, the difference between the Democrats and this speech and any other time I have been around where there's been a George Bush giving a State of the Union or whether there was even Donald Trump in the first term, the level of disgust that people feel about what this man is doing to our democracy is real palpable. And I get it that everybody's frustrated that there's not some phoenix rising from the ashes leading us to the promised land. It's going to be hard and messy for a few months. But he's in a horrible position in terms of the economy, and he's in an even worse position in terms of getting stuff through Congress.
Let's play some of Alyssa Slotkin. I have something to say about the Democrats, but I'm going to hold my powder. Let's play Alyssa Slotkin talking about the prices going up.
President Trump is trying to deliver an unprecedented giveaway to his billionaire friends. He's on the hunt to find trillions of dollars to pass along to the wealthiest in America. And to do that, he's going to make you pay in every part of your life. Grocery and home prices are going up, not down, and he hasn't laid out a credible plan to deal with either of those.
This is what Claire was talking about. It was clear. It was direct. It's like he hasn't laid out a plan for any of that. Look, Donald Trump did talk about grocery prices on the campaign trail. He talked about the eggs going down. He also talked about rounding up undocumented people. He talked about letting RFK do whatever he wants with women, with the HHS. He talked about Elon Musk coming in. Everything. He talked about the tariffs. I mean, I don't know. I'm not buying the thing that, like, oh, the Americans really just want the prices. That's what they all voted for. Nobody voted for some of the other stuff. They didn't think the other stuff was going to be this bad, is my estimation. And now the chickens, for lack of a better term, because they're not laying no eggs right now, Claire, are coming home to roost. But, I mean, am I right? Am I wrong?
Well, I think some of the people who voted for Trump were all in on his MAGA rally speeches. There's about 15% of the people that voted for him, Simone, that don't like him. They actually thought he was going to be better for them in terms of the personal things they were worried about in their lives. They're not Trumpers. They're not really, many of them probably voted for Joe Biden. And what we know is that is the swing vote in this country that actually decides who has power. And he thinks everybody who voted for him loves him, and he is wrong about that. And he is not addressing those people and the reason they voted for him. And you know what? We can snatch him back. We can snatch him back.
Yeah, but
how they gonna snatch it back, Michael, when they holding up bingo or auction signs?
I was gonna say, well, thank you, Simone.
Can we talk about it?
The bingo signs were killing me. I don't know who thought up the bingo signs, but they should be fired.
Michael, this is an indictment, in my opinion, on the Democratic leadership. I talked to a lot of members during they was texting. The staff were on my phones and they were calling. And I think the best way to describe it is the Democratic leadership said they didn't want disruptions and they wanted people to attend and bring a guest, and they wanted, little business as usual, and we're fighting back in other ways. There is a palpable disgust, as Claire said, from not just the members, but their constituents. And it's like a pot, as someone described it to me, that's boiling, and it's about to bubble over. If you do not allow the members a space to release valve, it's going to bubble over. And this was the visuals are not taking back the House in 2026. Not these visuals. Where's the signs? Put the signs up, folks,
the dry erase board with different messages.
Oh my gosh,
you don't think
crazy.
That's
put the paddles up, y'all. Do we have something of the paddles?
But here's the thing. Here the thing about the moment for me for folks, if you really want to understand the difference between Republican control and Democratic acquiescence, it's in how two things happened in that chamber and how they were handled. When Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert stood up and showed their behinds on the House floor, all right, when they just act a fool, shouting and talking and being loud and disruptive, what happened?
They stayed.
They stayed. Democrats didn't threaten them. Democrats didn't tell them to sit your behind down and shut up. Right? Order in the House.
Well, what happened? What should the Democrats done?
But what happened tonight?
Well, what should have happened tonight?
What happened then is what happened tonight. Because the Republicans weren't coming to play. They weren't going to give the Democrats the quarter. They knew what they were going to do. They knew they were going to try to be disruptive in some form. And their goal was to shut it down in one of two ways. And both of them worked. USA, as if they own that, that moniker, and throw them out.
I guess you mean
what should have the Democrats done instead of what they did?
Out.
No, I'm talking about tonight. What should the Democrats have done tonight instead of what they did?
Some of us believe they shouldn't have shown up. Or if they showed up at a certain point, here's the deal. When the congressman was kicked out, half that room should have left with him. Because that was the point. He was the only one to stand up and say, I'm not going to sit here and let you lie in this chamber. I'm not going to let you get away with this because you're lying right now. And instead of calling the man a lie, like they did to Barack Obama.
Right. I remember, I was there.
Right?
And nothing happened.
And what happened then?
Didn't he got a pat on the wrist afterwards?
I think there is what happened tonight, but I also think there is what happens tomorrow. And I think part of Democrat strategy is to let the man speak for himself. Can we play the sound of Trump describing tariffs as just a little disturbance?
Yeah.
That was crazy.
Tariffs are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much. No, you're not. Oh. And look where Biden took us, very low, the lowest we've ever been.
A concession in there, Claire, an admission.
Oh, yeah. No, and interesting, today, his Commerce Secretary came out and said he was going to roll back the tariffs tomorrow. Tomorrow, he was going to roll them back. There was going to be a compromise on Wednesday. So either he's folding tomorrow and he's going to pretend he didn't fold, or the Commerce Secretary has been put out way out on a limb, and it's going to be sawed off behind him because Trump is going to wait for the little disturbance to set in.
I want to know how much money was going to be made when that happens.
Oh, I know. Somebody's going to make money behind the scenes. And by the way, the SEC and DOJ will not prosecute them.
No, they won't.
No,
They won't because
I wonder who's getting paid tomorrow in the market.